portrayal of a villain. He's up there for me. Michael B. Jordan as Eric Killmonger is just phenomenal. It is absolutely so well done from beginning to end. It is just it's an incredible acting performance by Michael B. Jordan, and I think that Chadwick Boseman does well as Black Panther. Excellent Black Panther. Obviously, rest in peace to him. But the other characters who were just so well, like I did not. I'll be honest, I did not know who Winston Duke was, because he absolutely destroyed it as M'Baku. That's who I knew he was. The same with Shuri and the others that were in the movie as well. Okoye, all of them did well, and I've watched other things that they were in because they did well. And so it was a great cast, very good story. But to me, I probably put more emphasis than most on the villain in the movie, and Michael B. Jordan as Eric Killmonger, and his chemistry with everyone in the movie, even Andy Serkis as Ulysses Claw, who I think that they shouldn't have killed off, but how everybody radiated off of and in response to Michael B. Jordan was truly there. There was a lot of passion in this movie as well, that because of the cultural significance that you don't get with a lot of movies. So for those reasons, I was a big fan of it. It was number 5 on my list. It's because it's one of these standalone ones that I can watch easily anytime that I want. It's so enjoyable.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I agree with everything Sean said in terms of cultural impact. I didn't love the Killmonger villain though. Like, I don't know, maybe people like I love like kind of where he was coming from and what he stood for. I felt like the character and Michael B. Jordan. This wasn't Michael B. Jordan's fault. I just felt like the character he stood for so much, but also like he was written a little bit too immature. Like I felt like he could have been so I don't know. Like he wasn't as impactful for me as others were. Like as so many people after the movie were like, "Oh yeah, he was like the best villain and all this," and I didn't necessarily see that. But as an entire movie itself, definitely a great cultural reset. A watchable movie anytime. And Black Panther delivered on everything. I think it's like one of the only movies that has like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's definitely huge.
I'm not talking to you for the rest.
I'm sorry.
The Killmonger angle is an interesting conversation, and we don't have time to get into it right now because we got 16 other movies to get to. But it is an interesting conversation to have. I do think that on many levels, I think it's portrayed very well by Michael B. Jordan, but I do also agree with Max too. So it's interesting where it's like, he does great and he's a great character, but I also feel like they could have
like you're telling me he's just like assassin and word that, and I just didn't feel that. Like he felt like more like a teenager,
right?
That was like that than like a guy that was like this experienced killer and all that.
He was across. Like it was almost like he had too much vengeance. I feel like where they were kind of mixing.
It kind of came across as like teenage angst rather than like purpose and like strength and like it didn't hit the same for me.
The simple thing that I'll say is that sometimes I feel, especially with military personnel, there is a lot of immaturity in them as they continue to grow older in terms of their interaction with society. But the one thing that they are very mature at is the mindset of war, related, aspects to life, killing, problem solving, vengeance, all that different stuff. And he was very mature in that aspect. That's one of the reasons why I thought he was done so good. So I see y'all's point, but I think that that's the explanation as to why it is, because he was mature in only one thing, and that was military operatives, because that is what brought meaning to his life. So that's what I
can. Interesting take. I like it. And like I said, I want to kind of do a deep dive into some of these movies, but not today. So let's move on to the next one, number 8. At 212 total points, only 5 total points higher than Black Panther. 212 total points with an average of 7.31 is Marvel's Avengers. And this movie brings it all together, right? This is the first movie at the end of Iron Man when, Nick Fury is there and he's like, we're putting a team together. And it was like, oh my God, they're doing it. And then 4 years later, they finally do it. And they landed the plane, man. They landed the plane. This is a dope movie. It's so much fun. They absolutely crush it. And, of course, at this time, they've replaced what's his name? Hulk, right? Banner is no longer Norton. He's now Ruffalo, and they've also replaced Terrence Howard as well, which they'd already done. But Terrence Howard is now Don Cheadle, of course. So it's interesting. They had these things going on, right? But they absolutely crushed this movie. This movie still holds up to this day. It's fantastic. And, there's, again, a bunch of stuff going on. You got a bunch of people together, and it was almost like, can they actually pull it off? And they did. And this movie and again, if this movie flops, right, if they don't hit this movie, they're in huge trouble moving forward. So this movie obviously huge, and you could say that about all these movies, but this movie huge moving forward, and I love it.
Well, up to this point, especially when it had come to superheroes, but just in general universes, you had always seen, typically these movies followed the same trek. You saw them over maybe like a 5 to 6 year period. You'd get 3 or 4 movies, but it would be the same main characters and their development to where then you would, have, a storyline after 4 movies, you're good. But in this situation, this was truly the first time where you had origin stories from 3 or 4 different characters with others sprinkled in to where they were all coming together into one movie that was going to be the birth of an actual decade-long universe. The first thing of its kind that had ever been done. And that's what carried it, and that's what they did so well. These characters interacting for the first time, learning about each other. The fact that it did so well, but it was a repeat main villain who had just been introduced a year earlier in Loki, though Tom Hiddleston as Loki was great, I still think that that's something that makes it so good. You didn't have the intrigue like Infinity War of a new villain being introduced or new characters really being introduced, but it was the first true concept of its kind in the cinematic world, and they just absolutely nailed it. And so that's why I think that it stood out and why it's an all-time classic. It's just it was a first time at doing something huge, and it nailed it. And this is the linchpin of the entire universe. Like you said, Pat, if this doesn't work, the rest of it doesn't work. So glad.
Still one of my favorite scenes in any movie is when we got this sort of like hot and cold relationship with Bruce Banner wanting to be Hulk, and then in the battle he's like, "That's my secret cap. I'm always angry." That scene, like in the theater, erupted on that scene. One of my favorite scenes in any movie ever.
That's a great scene. And the scene, too, where they're fighting, with the scepter when they're arguing back and forth. And it's so interesting because Tony and Cap are going back and forth at each other, basically saying the exact opposite of what's true, right? The only good thing about you came out of a bottle, right? Which is the exact opposite of what the truth is with Cap, right? Where like he is great because of the person that he is and what he has inside of him, right? And him telling Tony like, you're the guy that like walks away. You'd never sacrifice for the team. And Tony literally sacrifices himself over and over and over and over again until he literally dies to save everyone. So it's like it's just one of those things where it's like they're saying those things, and I think they're saying it obviously because of the scepter, right? So they're just mad at each other and saying things that aren't true, that they know aren't true. But when you look back and you watch that scene back, you're like, oh my God, like literally everything they say is the exact opposite of what's actually true. So it was kind of wild. So anyways, let's move on to the next one. And so the next one is Iron Man, the original, the first one, 2008. The first movie. This one, 227 total points, 7.83 average. And again, now look, I don't love Jebediah Stane. I think it's kind of the end fight scene, like it's fine, but it's like not great. This is like the first of that mirror villain. Like the MCU is filled with the mirror villains, right? And Stane is kind of that first mirror villain, but there's also so much good about this movie, like him building the first Iron Man suit, the relationship that he has inside the cave. Like, there's so much good about this movie. And again, him showing up to the thing and supposedly, and then finding out later that he ad-libbed that. I mean, imagine that. Imagine that he ad-libbed "I am Iron Man," that he wasn't going to reveal himself. Imagine what the MCU would look like if he didn't reveal himself right there. Like, that changed everything that everyone knew that he was Iron Man at that point. And so, like, if it wasn't written that way, and he just brought up with some story or whatever, like, who knows where we'd be at this point? But like, that's such an iconic moment where he's like, gets up on stage and he's like, "I'm Iron Man," and everyone's like, "What?" Like, that was unbelievable. So this one again, ending scene, or I guess the ending fight scene with Stain and whatnot, like, okay, whatever. But this movie, belongs right where it is, in my opinion.
Yeah, and to me, it begins and ends with Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. I mean, if you want to talk about a persona from an actor matching perfectly with the perfect way to depict a character, and it's the MCU, just like we were talking about with Avengers. They need to do it right. This was the first chance they had to nail one of their thoroughbreds for this entire thing. They had to nail it, and they did better than anybody thought. And that's what I think that you think of now, is that when you think of what actors were just perfect for their roles, the most perfect combination of the actor and the character that he was playing, it begins and ends on a lot of lists with Robert Downey Jr. And that's what stood out to me. They absolutely nailed it, and that's a big reason why it carried it. They did good with Pepper Potts and Gwyneth Paltrow. I thought the movie was a pretty decent one as well. I actually like Jeff Bridges' portrayal of Jebediah Stane, but it begins and ends with Jim just absolutely nailing Downey Jr.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, to your point, they've redrawn the comics to make it look like Robert Downey Jr. I mean, he is Iron Man at this point. So I agree with you. All right, next on the list, number 10 at 301 total points. This is the first, like, shocker for me. I couldn't believe this one was at number 10, but here we are. At 301 total points, an average of 10.38. So that's a big jump now. We're talking about 7.83 to 10.38. So there's a pretty big gap between 9 and 10 here in these rankings. But at 10, again, 301 points, 10.38, Spider-Man Far From Home. It was a surprising one for me that it ended up at number 10. I like this movie. I thought I liked this movie more than most. I have it at like 12, or I might have it 10. Either way, 10 or 11. But the interesting thing about Spider-Man Far From Home, and I do enjoy this movie quite a bit. I think Peter's portrayal of Spider-Man is great. I think that the argument against this movie is Mephisto, right? Is that it was a little bit predictable with Mephisto. I do think Jake Gyllenhaal does a great job with the character.
you mean Mysterio.
Oh, why did I say Mephisto? Yeah, Mysterio. Thank you. I got WandaVision on the brain. Not actually WandaVision, but WandaVision. WandaVision theories. But anyways, the end scene for me. This is what does it. The fight on the bridge, to me, is one of my favorite scenes. The Peter Tingle and and Spidey sense, like that, to me, that is who Spider-Man is. And he doesn't really become that until that moment on the bridge, and it is awesome to see. And so number 10's a little high, but I can see it.
Yeah, it's high for me too. I don't think that it's the better movie of the Spider-Man movies, because Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio was okay. I just kind of blah through all of it. The most exciting that I was at the end of it was what it revealed then. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, I won't say much to that. But the final credit scene was it. Listen, I think Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. But I will be honest. I think there's a bit of fatigue on my end. I know that you need to separate things, and I typically can. But when this is the third iteration of Spider-Man, and just it's the overall like eighth or ninth movie, it wasn't that interesting to me. Like, nothing carried it to the level that other superhero movies were carried by, in terms of like strong character actors or whatever it may be. So it wasn't that great one for me. I watched it twice. I may or may not watch it again, but it was one of the less. It was one of the, not, I won't say it's worse, but one of the less intriguing movies.
I thought the fight scene between Spider-Man and Mysterio the first time was one of the most visually arresting scenes I've seen in the MCU. Like, that was fascinating. Like, all the illusions and stuff like that were pretty cool. But yeah, other than that, it doesn't really pack too much of a punch. But I will say this: I think, like, in comparison, like